Hi, everybody. Welcome to Social Studies. I'm so glad you're here and actually doing your assignments today like you're supposed to be doing. So, in today's Social Studies class, we're still continuing our conversation about World War One. But for today, we're going to be talking about what made World War One so different from every war before this. So, if you think about the Revolutionary War or the Civil War, and there were a couple other, the Spanish American War, French and Indian War, before this time, if you were a soldier fighting in the war, you had your gun and you were attacking head on with the opposing side. That's what war looked like at that point. You had to get close, you had to get up and personal with the other opposing soldiers in order to eventually kill them so that your side could potentially win the war. But with World War One, we have a lot of changes. We have a lot more technology that's going to make this war even more devastating because this technology makes it a lot easier for people to kill other people, which I feel like it's going to take us into one of our slides because I have a comment to make about that, but I'll just wait. So here's World War One, advancements in warfare. Let's see. So this was a war called the War to End All Wars. It was because it was so gruesome, it was violent, it was truly awful. A lot of horrible things happening to human beings during this time that we had never seen before. There'd never been a war like this, and there had never been so many people just killed in a war before World War One. A lot of people were like, wow, this is the worst thing that could happen. We'll never have a war like this again. We end up having another one in about 20 years, but for now, we're in World War One mindset. So, like I said before, there were a couple new inventions that were created during this time that just made it so much more awful. And this is the note that I wanted to make before. There was no such thing as a good war. Every war is a bad thing. Whenever there is a war, that means that humanity has failed to keep peace. Wars are a sign of failure, not a sign of success or a sign of strength. There's no such thing as a good war. There's no such thing as something that causes the deaths of millions and millions of people. That can't be a good thing. So just keep that in your mind as we learn about these things. It can be interesting to learn about these things, but keep in your mind, wars are always a bad thing. So let's talk about some of the advancements in warfare. So the first one, this wasn't invented during World War One, but it was definitely implemented a lot in World War One, meaning it was used a lot in World War One. It was something called trench warfare. You can kind of see in this illustration here, you have two soldiers on opposite sides. They build trenches, and then they pretty much fight from those trenches. In the middle, over here, this is what's going to be called no man's land, and there's a reason why there's a skull and crossbones here. No man's land was really, really dangerous. If you were to get out of the trench and try to cross over so that you could attack the soldiers over here, it wasn't going to end well. It was full of barbed wire, which is like really, really sharp metal that's just out there. It was full of like explosives that were buried under the ground. So if you stepped on them, they would explode. It made you a really, really easy target to be hit. If you're a person who's standing right here, this soldier right here has a clear shot to get you. So no man's land was really dangerous to go into. In this illustration, you can also see mustard gas is listed here. That's something we're going to see in a little bit. Mustard gas was a chemical warfare tool. And it was really, really awful. We're going to talk about it in a second. But a lot of times the mustard gas would be in no man's land to help deter, meaning prevent people from coming into this area. So no man's land, not great. It made you an easy target. It was full of barbed wire. It was full of explosives. It was full of mustard gas. People didn't go in there. And that's going to lead to a different invention just a little bit. So more about trench warfare, and I can see that that's a vocabulary alert there too, so just make sure you get that vocabulary word in there. So, like I said before, they dug these really, really long trenches, like miles-long trenches, and they would fight each other from those trenches. Already mentioned before, with no man's land, the trenches were disgusting. They were really awful too. They were often full of dead bodies from soldiers who'd been shot or injured and brought back to the trenches. So there was dead bodies. There were rats who would sometimes be eating the dead bodies, spoiled food. there'd be like human like excrements, meaning like the soldiers would have to like poop and pee in here too, so it's just really dirty. And that ended up bringing a lot of disease to the trenches. So these soldiers would be in the trenches for really, really long periods of time, and they're just being constantly exposed to all this disease. And a lot of soldiers actually died from the disease in the war, not necessarily from being shot and killed by an opposing soldier. So that was just another thing that I think people weren't anticipating seeing during World War One, but definitely a thing that existed was that trench warfare and all the awful things that come with it. So next up, we see machine guns and artillery. Artillery is just like the weapons that are being used at this time. So this was the first time that we get machine guns in our history, and the first time that we get machine guns for war. So remember, if you're like a Civil War soldier, you fire a shot, you put a bullet in, you have to stuff it in there, reload the gunpowder, and then you shoot again after a couple minutes. Machine guns, now that those are invented, many rounds of ammo can be released at one time, meaning you can shoot a lot of bullets in a very short amount of time. So the more bullets you can shoot, the more people that are going to get hit by the bullet. So a lot of people were being killed with this new technology of the machine guns. You also start to see a lot bigger artillery. So down here, and I'll actually zoom in so you can see that. This is a weapon called Big Bertha. And you can kind of see just how big it is. Like, these are people standing here. It's a big weapon. It released huge explosives that would be really, really devastating to the area that get hit by them. So just another form of weaponry that's used in this time. So you have a lot of soldiers dying in trenches, and you have a lot of soldiers dying because of the advancements in the weapons being used here. So the next one. Again, remember, there's no such thing as a good war. Every war is a bad thing. And here's just another example why World War I was so bad. The use of chemical warfare became very popular during World War I, and it was actually illegal to use before this, but it was being used anyway, because when you're at war, there aren't really any rules. What's going to happen? You're going to go to war, you're already in war. So there are three main types of chemical warfare that were used. And I can also see that's a vocabulary alert over there too, so just make sure you get that word in there. So the first one is chlorine gas. That one typically did have a little bit of a color to it, so people could see it if it was like out in the land. It would start off by like making your eyes hurt and your nose hurt and your throat really, really sore, and it would just make it really hard for you to like see and breathe and do things. And eventually it would kill the soldier by choking them to death. They would choke because they weren't able to breathe. So it was a really awful way to die. You also get phosgene gas, which is colorless, so you couldn't see it if it was out there. And as a result, a lot of soldiers were actually exposed to it, not even knowing it was there. And then they would leave, and then eventually they would start having these symptoms. The way that phosgene gas kills you is by it makes your lungs fill up with fluid, so you basically drown in your own lungs. And this was responsible for 85% of the chemical-related deaths during World War I. And then the last one, which you may have heard of before, is mustard gas. And this one's really, really awful. Again, it's one of those things where like you're exposed to it, it kind of hurts at first, and then you like leave and you're like living your life. But then later it causes blisters to start forming all over your skin. So like big bumps that are like full of fluids. And when they get really, really big until they pop, and then you have all these like open sores and blisters all over your body, and they get infected, especially if you're a soldier who's in the trenches during this time. It was already full of dead bodies and disease and like poop and pee and like other gross stuff. If you have open wounds, you don't want that kind of stuff on you. That's going to make things worse and make you get infected. And that's how a lot of the people died there. What's worse about mustard gas, too, is that it ended up killing 120,000 innocent people, just like regular civilians, not even soldiers. They ended up being collateral damage in World War I just because people couldn't figure things out. So, again, chemical warfare, horrible. I believe it's still technically illegal to use. I'm going to have to like look that one up again, to be honest. I hope it is, because it's really awful. It's a like torturous way to kill somebody. So next up, we see armored tanks. This is the first time that we get to see tanks used. And you can see that photograph there. You're like, that's not really what tanks look like nowadays. And you're right. The tanks looked a little bit different. And the reason why tanks were invented, essentially, is because Great Britain was like, we keep trying to cross into no man's land, and we keep getting like decimated. Like every soldier has died going into no man's land. We need to make something to make it easier to get across and into the enemy territory. So what they invented were armored tanks. They started using them in 1916, so about 2 years after the war had started, and it allowed them to go safely across into no man's land and into the opposing side. And it could deal a lot of damage. It had really large explosives, things that it could like shoot out, like a tank. So next up, again, not great stuff. This is the first war where we get to fight in the air. When I say we get to fight, I mean like fighting in the air was a thing. Over here, I see 2 more vocabulary alerts. So the invention of the airplane has happened. It's here. The airplane has been invented. They developed airplanes that were able to be equipped with guns, so they were able to shoot within the airplanes. And sometimes the airplanes were used just to like create communication back and forth so that people could talk to each other quickly. Sometimes the airplanes were used to drop bombs below. And in order to prevent those things from happening, sometimes you would have airplanes shooting at other airplanes in the air. When that happens, that's what's called a dogfight. It's just when you have 2 airplanes fighting in the air until one of them is shot down. And then the other form of air warfare is going to be what's called a Zeppelin. You might have heard the band like Led Zeppelin, named after this. So Zeppelins were basically like big blimps. So if you look in this illustration here, it's like a huge, huge military blimp. They were used to transport supplies, but a lot of them also were able to carry a lot of bombs, and they were able to drop the bombs onto cities and armies and stuff below. They were huge, absolutely enormous. And because they were so big, they were really, really hard to shoot down. It was hard to shoot down a Zeppelin. After the war, these ended up just carrying people around just for funsies, but during the war, definitely really devastating. And then the last advancement in warfare we're going to talk about today is going to be U-boats. And U-boats stands for undersea boats. So basically a submarine, the first war that we have fighting underneath the water. This is primarily used by navies, and the German Empire was the one who kind of like started using this to attack ships. The Lusitania that we learned about earlier, that one was sunk by a U-boat. I can also see that's a vocabulary alert word over there too. So these are just some of the advancements in warfare. I'm going to come back to the top just to go through real quick. So you had trench warfare, fighting within the trenches. Machine guns and artillery, the invention of like a machine gun with fast bullets able to kill people faster. Chemical warfare, killing people with chemicals. Armored tanks able to get across no man's land. Air fighting, dogfights and Zeppelins, able to drop things below and do a lot of damage that way. And then U-boats. Something I forgot to mention about U-boats, a lot of ships would be carrying supplies, either from like the United States to Great Britain, or it was a huge war, so pretty much any ocean. The U-boats typically would sink the ships so that they could no longer be bringing supplies to the opposing army, or military, I should say. But yeah, again, World War I, not a fun time, not a fun thing. A lot of devastation, a lot of really awful suffering involved in this war. And I hate to leave you on that note, but that is where we're going to stop for today. So if you have questions, you can always email me or send me a message or something, and I can help out and answer those. But for now, that's all I got for you. But thank you so much for watching the video. You actually have, I just remembered, you have a couple questions to answer. So the first question is going to say, what were 5 advancements in warfare that made World War I so devastating? We just list 6 of them, so you just need to tell me 5 of them. Why was it so dangerous to go into no man's land? List at least 2 reasons. If you rewind this video, I think about 5. And then finally, why do you think planes and zeppelins were used during World War One? What were the benefits? So just make sure that in addition to watching this lesson, you do in fact answer the comprehension question so I know that you've got a good idea about what's going on here. But that's basically all I got for you today, but thanks so much for watching and I'll see you later. So thanks guys.